What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Terminator Training Show. I'm Kevin Smith. Today is going to be a Q&A episode from a recent Instagram Q&A story, and I'm going to go through and answer some of the best questions. If you want your question answered on a future episode, that is the best place for it. Follow me on Instagram, Terminator_training, and look out for my usually bi-weekly question and answer. I did not answer a ton on Instagram this week, which has kind of been a theme lately, because it's just sometimes I feel like I'm going to have a bunch of time to answer things on Instagram, and then for whatever reason, I don't end up having that time. So I believe on this one, I gave a little warning and said these are mostly going to be on the podcast, and I did answer some on Instagram, but we're going to get to some more here. So I try and go through and find the better, more relevant, and more applicable to what I think would be a lot of people's questions, and I go through those and provide in-depth answers. So, quick announcement before we hop into today's questions: the soft bundle, which includes a Jack Gazelle 2.0, SFAS, the 2 and 5 mile program, and the soft prep recovery guide, is currently 25% off. Each individual item in that bundle is 25% off. So if you're interested in any of those, and if you want to hear more about any of those, you can go listen to episode 170, my last episode, where I explained most of my programs in lots of detail. My most popular ones, Jack Gazelle 2.0, and 2 and 5 mile. And I also went over the other ones, and you can learn all about those programs there. And if you find yourself interested in those, you still have about 48 hours. This is going to come out on the 15th. So if you're listening to this on the 15th of January, or it's not January, it's June, or the 16th, you still have time. The sale will end at midnight or 11:59 p.m. Monday, June 16th. So hop on that if you're interested, and let's hop into today's questions. What are your thoughts on a faster, more aggressive cut versus a longer, more moderate one? There are use cases for both, but in most scenarios, I would recommend going with the more gradual and more reasonable approach instead of going extreme and very, very intense. That is especially the case if, well, actually, there's a lot of different things that would be the case for. If you have a history of yo-yo dieting, definitely you've probably learned already that going really, really extreme is usually not the best option. Generally speaking, the faster you lose weight, the more likely you're going to be to A, lose muscle with it, and B, regain it at some point. Not the muscle, but the fat, the weight in general. And that is, of course, a general statement, but it's usually the case. Of course, there's plenty of exceptions. It's just what I've seen and what lots of other people have seen. Additionally, if you are someone who is interested in performing well and recovering well from your training, so maybe you have performance goals, but you also have body composition goals, then you definitely want to go the more gradual route, because going extreme is going to result in extreme recovery decrements. And also you're just going to feel low energy. You're going to be higher risk of injury when you are not fueling yourself properly. You're just going to have less nutrients coming in, macro and micronutrients, less calories. And that just creates a more stressed out state for your body. And when you're also doing a bunch of stressful training, that requires a lot of recovery and potentially could be somewhat risky in the sense of potentially injury promoting, then you want to be well fed, or at least closer to well fed than you would be if you were in an extreme calorie deficit. However, if you have experience with cutting kind of like this before, or if you have a really, really solid plan and strategy for afterwards, that's the biggest thing, having some sort of exit strategy when you're done, because a lot of people will be like, oh, I have to lose this weight, or I have to look like this or whatever by this date. And oh, that date happens to be, 5 weeks, 6 weeks from now. And they have a long, long way to go, and they will get there, or they'll try to get there. Usually it's going to take a lot longer to get where you think you want to be than the time you think it's going to take, if that makes sense. But either way, they get there and they get to the event, whether they reach their goal or not, and they have like no exit strategy. And all of a sudden it is just floodgates open and very, very difficult to stop eating, because you just didn't really have a plan to like reintroduce calories and reintroduce the general way of eating that you're used to prior to going on this extreme cut. And oftentimes what happens is you just overcompensate and you gain it all back. And then sometimes, like I said earlier, and then some. So definitely for most people, going the more reasonable and less extreme approach would be a good idea if you're working closely with a coach, Or like I said, if you just are very savvy with this stuff, you've done it before, it's worked well for you, you are eating plenty of protein, and you're not really all that concerned about performance, because no matter what, if you go extreme, you're going to see big performance losses, not just in training, but also in day-to-day life. You're just not going to feel very good. You're going to be hungry. You're going to have low energy. You're not going to want to be active. And this is not going to happen like right away, but the more extreme you go, the sooner that's going to happen. If you go more reasonable, you'll have a little bit less energy. You'll be in a little bit of a recovery deficit, but it won't be immediate. It'll be further down the road. And it'll kind of be this more gradual phenomenon where you start feeling little tiny signs that you might be in a calorie deficit, but it won't be just really drastic all at once. And it's a lot more manageable that way, because you just start to feel it and it's not super intense, and you can kind of just adjust as you need to or as you see fit. So of course, there are many different ways to go about this, but usually you're going to be most successful, even though it kind of sucks. And even though you're going to have to be patient, you're going to be more successful, most likely, if you go the more reasonable amount. You're just going to maintain muscle better. You're going to feel better. You're going to recover better. You're going to be less likely to regain it. And you're also going to be less likely to get hurt when you're training, especially, like I said, if you have performance goals. So that would be my suggestion. Next question. If prep programs are meant to be done during OSET, how do you balance it with the Army's PT? Yeah, so I did not create any of my programs with the full intention of being done during OSET, just because usually you're going to need equipment access. You're going to need at least some of your own free time to go train. I am down the road going to make a more minimal equipment OSET maintenance program, but that's not necessarily coming up super soon. It'll just be an eventual thing. I make some for some of my clients, and just depending on their situation, everyone's situation is going to be a little different, what they have access to and how much time they can dedicate to their own training. But that'll be a thing down the road. And for now, although you probably could follow some of my programs during OSET, that's not what they were made for. So there's your answer to that. But how do you manage PT versus following a program? Usually what I recommend is just doing some maintenance stuff. I have some clips of podcasts. I've got some actual full episodes where I talk a little bit about this, but I also have some clips. One that comes to mind right now, I'll try and link this in the show notes, is when I talked about it with Jon Hamilton. I think it was episode 140. And we went over how to maintain as an 18 X-ray when you're in OSET. But aside from that, usually what guys do is when they get done with OSET as an 18 X-ray, you're going to have plenty of time between when you start SOPSI and when you get done with OSET. So you're going to have airborne school, you're going to have pre-SOPSI, then you're going to have SOPSI, then you're going to have selection. During the time between the end of OSET and when SOPSI starts, although you will have to do some required training, required PT, required runs, things like that, from what I have been told, at least right now, because I've got one client who's right in that pre-SOPSI window right now, and I am programming for him, and he's pretty much able to train normally. We have to do a little bit of adjusting of the volume and intensity, especially of his conditioning, compared to, when I trained him before OSET and he was just on his own. He could do whatever he wanted for training and just all my training. But he's able to do it, and he is making solid progress, feeling good, and he's going to be more prepared for selection. So essentially what I'm saying is I would not necessarily, unless you have access to barbells, dumbbells, pull-up stations, dip stations, benches, squat racks, things like that, which I have not heard anyone have access to those things in OSET. I would just focus on listening to that clip, maintaining, doing some body weight exercises, doing some exercises with whatever equipment you do have, doing some pogo hops, doing some running in place. If you can get out for actual runs, that would be awesome. If you can wear your ruck around a little bit, that would be a decent, whether you're going for a ruck or not, just having a ruck on a couple times a week for an hour or two, if you have the ability to do that, that would be kind of what I recommend during OSET. Just accept the fact that you're going to lose some fitness while you're there. But if you were fit going into OSET, guess what? You are going to be able to regain it a lot faster, and you're going to be less likely to hurt yourself when you reintroduce, especially running, rucking, and things like that. So that's my recommendation. Again, in the future, I will most likely have a program for guys to follow at OSET, but it's just so person dependent, and chances are you probably don't have access to all the things that are required for my prep programs. So that's kind of how I would make do with it for now. Next question, should an option 40 guy do a RASP prep program before boot camp or during OSET? I usually would not recommend doing it prior to OSET, because you are going to basically be ready for RASP, but then you're going to go to OSET, and that's however long it is these days, like 5-6 months or whatever. So pretty much you're doing a mock train up for RASP, and then you're going to lose a decent amount of that fitness. And then I don't know what it looks like once you finish OSET. You go to airborne school. I don't know what the time is between like the last day graduation of OSET and when you start RASP or pre-RASP. I think pre-RASP is a thing, kind of like SOPSI. So I would highly recommend doing a non-specific, but kind of like a solid base building program prior to going to OSET. That way you are just generally very fit. And what program you choose, of course, you don't have to follow mine. You could follow really any program that is reasonable, of course. Not all programs are reasonable, but what a lot of guys do with my programs before they go to OSET as 18 X-rays or option 40 or even clients, whatever, they just do a nice balanced hybrid program. So program that helps you get stronger, a program that helps you get better at running. And again, if you want to hear more about my hybrid programs, you can go to the last episode and listen to that deep dive. But that's usually what I recommend, because when you train for selection, it's not very longevity friendly. So if you just train for selection, but then don't go to selection, you're just doing this very non-longevity friendly training plan. And then what is it for? You just show up to OSET and then you do OSET. And then, oh, by the way, you have to train for RASP again. So the fewer times you can train for a soft selection throughout your entire life, of course, some people have to go to selection twice, whether it's RASP or SFAS or the long walk, whatever it is. But if you can get away with just doing that one time, then you're going to be just more likely to feel good when you're older and less banged up throughout your career and thereafter. Because when you ruck run a lot and you run a lot, which you're going to be doing when you're preparing for RASP or SFAS or really any ruck-based selection or run-based selection, it's just a little bit more stressful than what I would recommend training on a regular basis. However, if you follow a solid hybrid program, you're not doing a bunch of ruck runs, you are not running super duper high mileage and potentially doing 2-a-days almost every day, things like that, then you're going to build that really solid base, that solid foundation. And again, you're going to lose some at OSET, but then you're going to have the ability to make serious gains and adaptations from your pre-RASP program when you get done with OSET. You're also going to have more time, more equipment, more schedule freedom. I mean, you're not going to have perfect schedule freedom, but probably better than OSET, and you will be better off that way. Additionally, minus the fact that it's not longevity friendly, it is a type of training, especially if you follow the same program twice. So if you follow, say, a RASP prep program, and then you go to OSET, you follow that entire program, then you go to OSET, then you follow it again, you're going to make less progress that second time than if you went more general prior to OSET and then you went very specific prior to RASP. The further away you are from needing to perform, whether it's at RASP or SFAS, any selection, the more general your training should be. Of course, it should be somewhat specific, like swimming 5 days a week instead of and doing 0 running and 0 rucking. That's not quite what I mean by general. Or just doing super heavy squats, bench, and deadlift for sets of 2 and focusing on powerlifting. Yes, that'll make you stronger, but it's a little bit too general. It's not quite as specific. You can do those lifts, you can do them for low reps, but you need other things too. But what I mean is the less like selection your training is when you're way far out, kind of the better. Even if it's not doing the exact same things that you would do during a selection prep, you're still going to get more fit in general. You're still going to build your running tolerance and your running ability, your aerobic base, your tolerance to impact, your ability to recover, your general strength, some calisthenic ability, but you're just not like necessarily peaking before OSET. You want to peak before you go to RASP. So that is the way I would split it up. And hopefully that answered the question. But yeah, it is tough during OSET. You just kind of got to realize that every single person who's come before you that has made it through RASP or who's made it through as an 18 X-ray dealt with the same thing, if not maybe even worse. Like when I was in OSET, we had no equipment whatsoever. I know not every barracks has equipment, but we had none at all. So, and we were not allowed to go out on our own and really do anything. So some guys would do like running in place and some guys would do some body weight stuff, but really that's all we had access to do. It was a lot shorter back then, so we didn't have quite as much time to like lose fitness. So either way, it's just not perfect, but Everyone who's come before you has been successful. Even though they lost some fitness at OSET, you can regain it, and you should be good to go if you get that solid RASP prep program in afterwards, or do your best to get it in. I don't know what that period of time looks like. Just kind of do your best, critical think, use some common sense, and listen to your body, and you should be golden. Next question, why do you put pumps before main lifts in Jack Gazelle 2.0? This has been not answered in a long time, so glad you asked. All right, so what he's referring to is some of the training days, the lifting days in Jack Gazelle 2.0 involve some pump style lifting prior to hitting main lifts. So for example, on a leg day, you might see some calf raises and some leg curls prior to hitting your main squat. Or in an upper body day, you might see some face pulls and maybe some flies, or I can't remember exactly what I have programmed for the upper body days, but I think there's some face pulls, maybe some lat prayers, maybe some straight arm plate raises for your front delts and kind of warm up the upper back and the shoulder mobility. The main reason for that is because Jack Gazelle 2.0 is less of a brute strength based program than Jack Gazelle 1. Where your main goals are not to just get super strong in the squat, bench, and deadlift. Your main goals are to get stronger, of course, but also just have slightly better feeling joints and also be a little bit more geared towards hypertrophy or muscle gain than Jack Gazelle version 1 or some other strength bias program. And as such, your muscles don't necessarily care how much weight is on the bar. They only care about the tension on them. So whether you are squatting with, say, 300 pounds because you didn't do anything prior to that and you're super fresh, you work up to 300 pounds and you do your whatever 3 sets of 6 to 8 or 4 to 6, whatever it is, or you're squatting with 285, 290 because prior to doing the squats, you did some leg curls, maybe you did some goblet squats, maybe you did some backward sled dragging. You've got a pump in your legs already, so they're slightly fatigued, really not that fatiguing, but a little bit more than if you just went and warmed up and went straight to that squat. You're still putting the same stimulus and same stress on the musculature, but because you have a pump, usually muscles with pumps or muscles that have pumps that surround certain joints. So say, for example, you have a hamstring and a quad pump going into a squat. Typically, you are less likely to feel significant knee pain during that squat. You're less likely to hurt yourself during that squat. And because you're going to be using slightly less weight, it's really not that much weight. You'll notice that the exercises that I have you do before squats are very low fatigue exercises. And there's another reason for that I'll get to in a second. But you go into that squat, you're using a little bit less weight, but you're still getting that same stimulus. And it is generally going to be more longevity friendly, even if it's less ego friendly. That's the thing, is so many people lift with ego and they want to put as much weight at the bar as they possibly can. And you're going to meet a point in your life where that is no longer serving you. And you'll either meet that because you got a program, you kind of learned about it, or you're listening to this, you're like, oh, this might be something I should try. Or you're going to meet that because you just get hurt or banged up way too often. That's pretty much what happens to most people who lift for really long periods of time, especially if they are kind of attached to their lifting numbers. Believe me, this was me. I never started training like this till I was probably 30-ish years old, and I wish I would have started training like that earlier, but you live and you learn, and almost nobody programs like this either. There are people who program like this. I'm not the only one, but it is definitely a nuanced thing that not a lot of people program. So additionally, the other reason I have you do those lifts prior to your main lifts is because most people treat those lifts like check the block exercises, usually because they do them at the very end of their workout and they're super fatigued. So for example, if you do a bunch of squatting, single leg squatting, hinging, and then you are pretty damn smoked and you get to your leg curls, most people in my observation, in my experience, just kind of check the block with those leg curls. They don't really care that much. They don't pay attention. They're not super focused. And it shows because most people are way more quad dominant or anterior chain dominant than posterior chain or hamstring dominant. And bringing up your hamstring strength is a very, very important, I would call it a critical thing for a lot of people, especially if you just have a history of checking the block with most leg curls or not even doing leg curls or doing them poorly or doing like a 4 or 5 to 1 quad to hamstring or glute ratio. which is very, very common amongst dudes, at least. Definitely not amongst females, but that's definitely common amongst dudes. So when you're doing them first, they help you warm up because you're getting a little pump in the musculature, and you're also not doing it in a super fatiguing way. So they're going to allow you to still get really good stimulus out of those main sets. And they're also going to give you the ability to not just treat those lifts as check the block exercises. And so as you get older and as you progress through your training journey, you are probably going to thank me for programming like that, or at least planting that seed. Now, I don't program like that for every single client, and I don't program like that in all of my programs, just some of them, because it's not the only way to do it. But for the goal of Jack-Gazelle 2, it is the most appropriate way to do it. And you'll notice that the more often you do it, the more used to it you'll get. And you might even notice that once you get to your main sets, you're not any weaker. Some people even notice they're stronger, especially for leg curls and calf raises. The great thing about doing that before squats, calf raises especially, is you kind of open up that ankle mobility. So of course you're hitting your calves too, but if you do the calf raises the way I have explained in there with the pauses at the bottom and really going hard and dorsiflexing at the very bottom, driving your feet up towards your shins, you're going to notice that you can squat deeper because it's enhancing your ankle mobility. And plus, having that hamstring pump is a great thing to just kind of keep your knees feeling a little bit better. And you'll notice that it really does not affect your squats. So that is kind of the main reason I do it. I call it like a reverse programming thing. Most people program the exact opposite way. And it's not like I have you do like 6 exercises prior to hitting a super heavy squat, and I don't use percentages in that program either. So you're not really supposed to be stuck to a certain number for the squats. You'll notice in Jack-Gazelle, I don't do this because it's more of a strength program, the original Jack-Gazelle, but it's just a programming technique that not a lot of people talk about or appreciate. And a lot of people do ask about it because they've just never seen it before. So hopefully that was a solid enough explanation to kind of give you a little bit of the why behind it. Next question, would you say 5 days a week of training for SFAS is enough if done for 6 months as an 18X? Yeah, so as usual, the number of days per week you train is maybe 0.5% of what matters. You could train 5 days per week, once a day, so 5 sessions per week, and get amazing results. Would you be able to get the best possible results that you could if all of your recovery and perfect lifestyle and stress management, you ate perfectly, you slept perfectly, just perfect recovery conditions? Maybe not. You might be leaving a little bit on the table. But you could also train 5 days per week, once a day, and get absolutely nowhere because either you're just going way too hard or you're doing the wrong shit or you're just not managing the volume, the intensity properly. And that same thing can be said for multiple different things. So like you could do 2-a-days, and you could do 2-a-days for months and months and get amazing results. Some people do 3-a-days, they get amazing results. Or you could do 2-a-days or 3-a-days and just destroy yourself and not get any results. Or you could do 2-a-days and not do enough because it's just the number of days that you're training. It's not really saying much about your overall potential gains or progress. So it's very hard to answer the question. However, yes, training 5 days a week, if you're doing the right things and you're progressing and you're feeling good and you're not overdoing it or underdoing it with volume, with intensity, you're choosing the right exercises, you're sequencing them properly, you're doing the right style of conditioning, and so on and so forth. Yes, you absolutely can rest assured that 5 days a week is enough. But again, it's just not quite enough to give you a solid answer just because I don't know anything about your sets, reps, rest intervals, what you're doing for training each day, your conditioning plan. So in order to give you a better answer as to what would be most optimal for you, I would have to know that. I'd also have to know about your schedule and your sleep habits and your lifestyle habits, your vices, your nutrition, to really provide a more specific answer for you. But number of days per week of training is definitely a factor. Like if you said training twice a week, is that enough? I would say most likely not. Almost definitely not. But 5 days a week, 6 days a week, maybe doing some days where you do 2-a-days, maybe some days you just do 1. even 4 days a week, but maybe you have a couple 2-a-days in there would be sufficient. It's just a very, very tiny piece of the pie, so hard to answer. Next question, what program should my wife follow after giving birth? Great question. If she has lifting experience, I would say Time Crunch would be the best program possible for her. It does require a little bit of a history of lifting. Like if she's never really trained before and she gives birth, she would probably want to work with a trainer one-on-one just to learn the basics. But if she's been lifting before, she got pregnant, maybe took some time off around giving birth, like late in her pregnancy, giving birth, rightfully so, then she absolutely should do something like Time Crunch. That is one of the populations or one of the avatars that I made it for, busy moms or busy dads or just busy individuals that don't have a ton of time to train, but they still want to get really good results in a very short period of time. That is definitely the best program for them. So have her check that out. That would be my recommendation. Next question, how to get back into the groove of things after an extended period of time off from the gym. Techniques? No real techniques. I would say mindset is the most important. So a lot of people will, it also depends on what you took time off for. Let's assume that you took time off for something other than injury, because that would just add a whole different consideration to it. And I would recommend working with a physical therapist or a doc or something like that. But let's just assume you took time off for whatever reason. One, don't beat yourself up for it and think in the past. Just be like, okay, that happened. I'm getting back into training and I'm going to forget about my lapse in motivation or whatever caused you to take this time off. That's one thing, because when you beat yourself up about it, most people have a tendency to just overdo it and try to make up for that lost time. That is one of the worst things you can possibly do. The great thing about taking time off, even if you took time off because you had a lapse in discipline or whatever, is you are subject and receptive to great gains with minimal training, minimal stimulus. So that is what you should do. The minimal effective dose to make progress. And you'll be surprised at how little that is at first. You're going to ramp up eventually. You're going to increase your intensity, your volume, and so on and so forth. But at first, really anything other than not training is going to give you some stimulus to adapt to and improve from. So that should be your mindset. Don't beat yourself up. Don't try to make up for lost ground. Ease back into it. Train less than you think you're capable, like way less than you think you're capable. Your goal, first couple of weeks, should be to leave the gym feeling like, oh man, I could have definitely done quite a bit more. If you leave the gym feeling like that, and also maybe a secondary goal would be like not get crazy sore. You're probably going to get sore regardless because it's going to be novel. And until the repeated bout effect kind of kicks in, you're just going to be a little sore. But if you can leave the gym feeling like I had a lot more in the tank, but I stopped, and the next day you feel a little bit sore in the muscles you worked, but nothing crazy, then that's a win, because you can always increase in the future. What can be very demoralizing is when you take a bunch of time off and, a lot of people are kind of pissed at themselves. They take all this time off. They're like, okay, I'm going to really hammer it. I'm going to get back into it. I'm going to just go full blast. What happens is they overdo it and they are super sore and destroyed. They give their body too much of a stimulus, so they can't even adapt to it. Your body's just in like trying to recover and heal mode. It's not in adapt and grow mode. And oftentimes they'll do it for a couple weeks and be like, I just either have to stop or I have to detract. I have to take away from this. And it's a lot more demoralizing to have to take away because you're doing too much than it is to start light, start by almost underestimating your abilities and be able to add to it, increase the intensity, the load, the volume, whatever it is in the future. It's not even not demoralizing to do that. It's motivating to do that. Like, okay, I'm crushing this. I can add more. So that would be my recommendation, my overall general recommendation. Are there any techniques? Not necessarily. Like, I wouldn't try and like find these like random techniques or anything. They're probably gimmicky and BS anyway. But that should be your mindset. Getting back into it. Remember that you can always add, and it's really, really demoralizing to subtract. And it's even more demoralizing to get back, go way too hard, and either hurt yourself or just be super burnt out and super sore and super under recovered for a couple weeks. And then boom, next thing you know, you're taking another hiatus because you just can't handle it. So that's my best advice for you. Next question, what are some attributes you've seen in the best Green Beret officers and the worst? All right, so I'll just talk about the best, and the worst, you can kind of just think the opposite of this. So number one, physical fitness. This goes for everyone, not just officers. If you are an officer though, and you show up to your team and you're one of the least fit individuals on the team, that is not a good start at all. You are the face of the team. Even though the team sergeant is going to be more day-to-day in charge of like the guys, you're still the face of the team. You're facing out, especially higher. So you are the person who does briefs to majors and lieutenant colonels and sometimes even generals. You are the person that gets the team certain missions and certain training opportunities. Like that kind of goes through mostly you. Of course, the team sergeant and the warrant might be involved too. But if you show up and you're like fat, out of shape, and can't keep up with the team, or even if you're just fat, but you're in decent shape, it's just not a very good first impression. So keep yourself relatively fit looking, but most importantly, actually be fit, be able to perform. You don't have to be the fittest guy on the team, but you definitely should not be like bottom third or anything close to that. Ideally, you're one of the top fitter guys on the team. That sets a great example for the rest of the guys on the team. Even if you're really not that competent, which you probably won't be all that competent when it comes to being a GB officer right when you show up. You'll have to learn a bunch on the fly. That's totally fine. That's normal. Like officers aren't expected to immediately take over a team and know everything. And that is kind of brings us nice into the next one is don't feel like you have to know everything and don't pretend to know everything if you don't know things. One of the biggest leadership qualities one can have is if somebody knows and or is more experienced with something than you are, letting them kind of lead that. This is not you like being like, I am just going to take a back seat and I'm going to pretend that I'm not here, or I am going to just kind of be feeble and shy and I'm afraid to fail, so I don't want anyone to see me fail, so I'm just going to like sit in the back. Not necessarily, but if you guys are doing something and you've never done it before and you know that a couple guys on the team have, nothing wrong with it, kind of just delegating that leadership, at least for that thing, to them. Other things that are important, one is just confidence in your own ability, and you get confident by becoming competent. And again, you're not going to be super competent at first, but there's always practice to do. There's always things you can learn. There's always questions you can ask guys. You know, if you show up and you're not the best shot on the team, guess what? You should find the best shot on the team and have him help you, because you don't want to be the worst shot on the team as the officer. You're not expected to be the best shot. Most likely you won't be. You won't get as much training time. Of course, if you do stuff on your own, that's different, but no one expects the officer to outshoot everybody on the team, but you definitely should not be, again, like bottom third. And if you are at first, no big deal. Find the person who's top shot or second top shot and work with them until you get better and more competent. That will give you more confidence. If you don't brief well, or if you don't speak well, you're not well spoken, or if you get nervous, or you just don't really have natural charisma, what I would suggest doing is doing something like Toastmasters, or joining an improv class, or even, honestly, this sounds a little crazy, but you could start a podcast and just don't post the podcast. Don't put it anywhere, like unless you want to, of course, but what you can do is just go talk to yourself in front of a camera. Or even if you want to just do audio, you can turn your phone audio recording on and speak to yourself. Like you can practice talking about certain things in SF. It doesn't even have to be certain things in SF, but it could be like really anything where you just talk to yourself a couple times a week. And believe it or not, you get better and better and better at that over time. I used to not be a very good briefer, and I would say over time, I learned how to do it a little bit better, but that was through practice and repetition. I never did this podcasting thing until relatively recently, towards the end of my career. But even during the end of my career, after I started podcasting, my briefing skills were way, way better. My speaking skills to other people that are important to set a good first impression for were way better because I just practiced talking more. And I used to just kind of have this thing in my head where like, I'm just not a very well-spoken individual and I am just not super charismatic. But turns out there's just a series of skills that are involved in being well-spoken and charismatic. And those skills can be built by practicing, just like any other skill. A couple other things, just kind of rattling some off the top of my head. One, when you show up, don't try and just reinvent the wheel. If the team is really fucking solid already and you show up and you try to change a bunch of stuff, no one's going to be down with it. People are not going to like that at all. Guys on the team are not going to like that. And you are going to have almost like a come from behind victory ahead of you that you'll have to like work hard to get people to, guys are going to respect you, but almost a come from behind process where you're going to have to regain the trust and the likelihood that the team is going to follow you and listen to you and do what you tell them to do. Whereas if you show up to a really good team and you don't try and change anything and like make your presence felt, chances are the team's gonna be like, okay, this guy knows what's up. However, on the flip side, if you show up to a team and it's all ate up, then you're probably going to have to implement some new stuff or change some things or adjust some things or start doing things that you weren't doing before or make certain things you guys are already doing better. But being able to execute critical thinking skills and kind of assess the situation is huge. And critical thinking, I mean, that's important really for any Green Beret. And some people do lack that. But I would say those are some of the top ones. Confidence, being able to speak well, being super fit, looking fit, not trying to reinvent the wheel, not changing things that aren't broke, and just being a good dude. And I would say lastly, on the topic of being a good dude, you don't have to be afraid to like be one of the bros. Like I've had some captains that are more bro-y. They're like more one of the guys, and other captains that are just like completely separate, almost like they're an officer, so they can't do the same thing that enlisted guys do. There's definitely a line, and the best captains, the best team leaders know where that line's at between being one of the boys when it's time to be one of the boys, and then not being one of the boys when it's not time to be one of the boys. The dynamic in SF is a little bit interesting because sometimes you guys are fucking around, joking around, and everyone's having a good time. Everyone's laughing, joking. You guys are just having an awesome time for whatever you're doing. There's other times where you're going to have to be like more of an officer and more of a captain and be more authoritative, and finding where that line's at and knowing how to act in each situation is a skill. And it's definitely something that the better captains have learned. Again, not something you're going to know as soon as you show up. You got to get a feel for the team, but it is definitely important. I'm not saying you have to be like one of the bros, but I personally, all right, I'm back. We just lost power and the internet was out for a bit, but I'm back. And I believe I was talking about the line between being one of the boys as an officer versus doing your actual officer, like being more in officer land. This is kind of hard to explain and put into exact words. Hopefully you guys can not hear that thunder, but it's very loud. But the best officers that at least I've been around kind of know where that line's at, and they know when to be in officer leader mode and more in like hanging out with the boys, one of the boys mode. So you guys are going to do basically everything together. It's not just going into the team room and doing training and planning and missions. There's a lot of time that you guys will spend together traveling. You guys will spend time together, you know, going out as a team, working out, things like that. So I guess like not being a super weirdo that's like very reserved. Of course, you don't have to be one of the boys. Like you don't have to be a bro. Like that's not required. But in my experience, the more enjoyable guys to be around were usually like that. So that is my recommendation. Hopefully that kind of helps give you a little bit of a picture of what it'll look like. Next question, why do you program rack chins instead of pull-ups? Great question. Rack chins, for those who are not aware, are a kind of a pull-up assistance exercise. They're very similar to pull-ups, except you are basically set up in a squat rack with either a bar or rings hanging across, and you have a bench or a box or something like that where you put your feet up. It's almost like a combination between a pull-up and inverted row, where you're just doing body weight rows with a bar. Your feet are up, so your body's kind of in this L-shaped position. What it does is multiple different things that are beneficial. One, the angle of pull is a little bit more favorable to hit the lats better than a pull-up. Two, because you're not pulling straight up and down, it's not a direct vertical pull, it's more of like a semi-vertical pull. it puts your shoulders in a position where you just don't have to have as much shoulder mobility in order to execute the movement well. So it's great if you ever get bothered, if your shoulders ever bother you with pull-ups or direct overhead work, whether it's pushing or pulling, then rack chins can be a great substitution. 3, one of the biggest advantages is it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to cheat with body English. Because it's more of a closed chain exercise, like your hands are touching something as well as your feet are resting up on a bench or a box or whatever you use for your feet. So you can't really use a bunch of body English like you can with pull-ups. A lot of people will cheat their last few reps of pull-ups because they're attached to doing a certain amount of reps rather than getting a certain amount of stimulus. So they'll hit form failure, like failure with their normal pull-up form that's actually effective and not really that stressful on the shoulders and elbows. And then they'll start the body English fiasco, where they just start kicking their legs, they start kipping, they start not going all the way down. They just use a bunch of body English. Dave Tate calls them muscle fuck reps. And although, yes, you'll do more pull-ups that way, and if you're doing a max pull-up test and they allow that shit, then okay, fine to do that once in a while. But in regular training, you are not doing yourself any favors because it is not going to be all that effective for growing the lats. It's going to be very fatiguing because you're going past failure. And also, when you start introducing body English to people with lacking shoulder mobility, lacking shoulder stability, which is probably about 95 to 98% of lifters, then you start introducing possibilities or likelihoods of running into shoulder issues or elbow issues or both, or neck issues, like lots of different issues. So the rack chin is a great substitution, or it's a great assistance lift. Maybe one day a week you do a regular pull-up day. Maybe the other day you do some rack chins or some lat pull downs. That's fine too. But rack chins, honestly, are one of my favorite exercises. The great thing about them too is you can load them. So you can grab either a medicine ball, or you can grab a barbell plate, or you can grab a dumbbell, and you could wear a weight vest, or you could put a chain, whatever, and you can weight them. So you put them like on your lap, and they're very easy to standardize because, again, you can't really cheat them. So you know when you're making progress because you really can't cheat the reps. So if you're doing more reps or using more weight, you're making progress. Whereas with pull-ups, I could do a set of 10 pull-ups and hit failure, and then I could do 4 or 5 more pull-ups by muscle fucking them and using crazy sloppy form. So how do I know like where my actual failure was? Like, how do I standardize that? Whereas with rack chins, yeah, you could cheat them if you want. Like, they definitely can be cheated, but also they are harder to cheat. And I would say because they're easier to take close to failure without messing your shoulders and elbows up, especially if you do them with rings or if you attach angles 90s to the bar and you can twist throughout that range of motion, you are just more able to take them to failure without messing yourself up. And you don't have to train every set of everything to failure. Usually when I program rack chins, I program maybe the last set to failure, because you can just do it with really good form. And when you hit failure, you're just not going to be able to get your chin up high enough. And you can do that without really messing your shoulders up, or with a much lower chance of messing your shoulders up. So I would say they're more effective for hypertrophy, and they're definitely more effective for a vertical pull down, even if they're not directly vertical, semi-vertical for most people in general, because most people just don't have the requisite shoulder mobility to do pull-ups every time they train, or every time they do a pull day, pull-ups, chin-ups, neutral grip, whatever, without messing their shoulders up at some point, at some time down the road. So that is the main reason for rack chins. Not saying that they should be done by everybody instead of pull-ups, but they should absolutely be considered, especially if pull-ups bother you, or if you hit a pull-up plateau, or if you just have bad form with pull-ups and you can't get pull-ups to really hit your lats. I mean, honestly, most people's pull-up form doesn't really hit their lats all that well, because they just round their shoulders forward, use a bunch of momentum. It's more of like a bicep, forearm, teres minor, teres major exercise than an actual lat exercise. Of course, if you have really good pull-up form and you execute them well, it's definitely a good lat exercise. Wow, that was loud thunder. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but that is rack chins in a nutshell. Let's go to the next question. Next question, how does the terrain affect run times at SFAS? Example, how many minutes does your 5 mile decrease? Very, very little. The terrain that they do the runs on is not the same terrain, generally speaking, as they do like team week. So it's not like super loose sand. And the sand hills, although it's called the sand hills, there's sand and there's hilly terrain. The hills are like just hills. They're not serious, like crazy soul crushing hills that just take forever to climb and are super steep or anything like that. It's just rolling hills. So the thing that's going to affect your running, especially like towards the end of gate week most, is the fact that you are 4 or 5 days in to gate week. They always do the runs on a different day, and no one knows exactly what the distance is and which days you're going to do what. You'll know whether you're running or rucking that day by whether you're wearing a ruck or not. But aside from that, you won't know if it's going to be a short run, long run, and it could be on like day 2 or it could be day 4. You're going to do 2 runs besides the PT test, but maybe you'll do them on like day 2 and 4. Maybe you'll do them on day 1 and 2. Maybe you'll do them on day 1 and 4. You just won't know. So the fact that you are going to be fatigued, underslept, underfed, stressed out from your previous training throughout that week, say you're doing the second run, if you've already done your PT test run, 2 rucks, 1 run, you're going to be more fatigued going into that. So that's going to affect your time or your potential time significantly more than the terrain. So I wouldn't worry too much about it as long as you do a little bit of running in rolling hills, whether you're doing it on more dirt roads, gravel roads, or you're doing them on roads or a mix of both. That's what you'll see at selection. You should be totally fine. I wouldn't stress it too much. If you live in Florida or someplace flat, just doing some hill repeats, or maybe you do every so often you go on a treadmill and do a tempo run where you kind of adjust the incline up and down a little bit just to mimic rolling hills minus the downhill part. Unless you have a Nordic track, a really nice Nordic track, then you can go downhill, which, you know, if you have a Nordic track, definitely take advantage of that, especially if you live in a non-hilly area. But even if you don't do that, if you can climb hills pretty well, you should be fine. I will say doing a little bit of downhill exposure would be a really good idea. I know I'm talking to a very specific type of person right now that lives in an area that doesn't have access to hills. But even if some guys do most of their training on tracks or most of their training on treadmills, on like a flat or maybe like 1% incline treadmill, they don't get any downhill running exposure or rucking exposure. I would definitely make sure that you get a little bit of downhill exposure, just because that is, although it's way easier to run and ruck downhill, you're going to go faster. Of course, it's less energy cost because of gravity. It is a little bit more stressful, a little bit to a moderate amount more stressful on the quads as well as like the tendons around the knees, just because you are going to be going faster. Especially if you don't have like a really, really good stride, you don't have really good downhill running technique, it'll be more stressful on the knees. So you'll just be more sore and more fatigued afterwards, even though it was easier to do than running uphill. It's more fatiguing. So consider doing a little bit of downhill running. But going back to the question, wouldn't worry too much about the terrain. Just if you're kind of already borderline on your 5 mile, say you're running like a 38-minute 5 mile or even a 37:30, you will definitely be slower, even if it's not a 5 mile run. It is probably somewhere around 5.5 to 7 miles, I would guess, the longer run. You'll definitely be slower. So I would definitely consider trying to get that time a little bit faster going in so you have peace of mind. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the train. It's really not all that prominent. Next question, how would you program the 8 to 12 week specific train up for a sprint triathlon for general fit person? All right, so I would say day 1, week 1, you will do a bike, run, brick workout. I would say do this probably in the range of a 2-hour bike or maybe like a 60-ish mile bike, and then a 1-hour run, maybe a 90-minute, just kidding. I unfortunately cannot go about doing an entire sprint triathlon programming for 8 to 12 weeks in a podcast episode or on an Instagram story. I also am not a triathlon coach. So although I could string together or piece together a triathlon program for somebody, I would not be the first person to ask. I have never programmed for triathletes, and I am not savvy enough with especially biking to be confident in my ability to be anywhere near the right person to ask for a triathlon program. So even if I was coaching you, I would probably say, or even if you wanted coaching from me, I would probably tell you, go try and find a actual triathlon coach. But yeah, I kind of just picked this question as a joke, but just in the future, I've had questions like this before. That's also the secondary reason I picked it. people will ask, like, how should I program for the next 6 months or the next 3 months or the next 12 weeks or whatever. And unfortunately, I don't know anything about you. And it would take me a while to write a program for this type of thing, like quite a while. So in the future, definitely all about you asking me about certain pieces of programming or things like that. But just for anyone who's listening, who's thinking about asking a question about, like, what should my program look like exactly for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, I'm not going to answer that. And I might use your question as a little bit of a teaching point. So that's what I got for you. Go try and find a triathlon coach and you'll be much better off. All right, guys, once again, lost power. Luckily, this time it was in between questions, I believe. I'll have to go back through and see when it was. But I am going to apologize beforehand if you guys can hear the thunder in the background and the fact that this is a little bit of a choppy episode. But I am determined to get a few more questions in. And this is really the only opportunity I have to record this episode today. So we are going to tough it out, and hopefully you guys can, like, get in the environment and, like, really feel the power of the thunder. My female dog Abby is right next to me. She absolutely fucking hates thunderstorms. So I can literally, she's up against my leg right now and I can feel her shaking. You know what? Let's put her on camera. There she is. That is her first appearance on the Terminator Training Show. If you've been listening for a while, you've probably heard my male dog barking in the background. But anyway, let's get a few more questions in, hopefully without losing power. Here we go. Recommendations for people with foot deformities in making ruck adaptations. It's a struggle, LOL. Yeah, so I mean, it does depend on what your foot deformity is. I would for sure meet with a podiatrist and really figure out what you can do, what you can't do, some of the potential things that you can fix, or maybe corrective exercises to kind of overcome whatever your foot deformity is. I'm assuming it's something like either a club foot or serious bunions or something like that. But aside from that, ruck adaptations just come down to training rucks. So assuming you're able to go out and ruck, you're definitely going to be at a little handicap, or maybe a big handicap, depending on what you've got going on. But there's no real secret to it beyond that. So assuming you can ruck, assuming your foot doc helps you with some sort of way to manage it, whether it's even potentially temporarily putting a Band-Aid on it, whatever that may be, a brace, in order to get through the harder parts, or if it's some sort of corrective in nature exercises or something like that, that kind of helps you overcome or at least mitigate what your issue is, or a combination of both. That would be my best recommendation. Besides that, training rucks properly, I would go back and listen to, I believe it's 163. Episode 163 is basically a breakdown of how I recommend going about becoming a rucking monster for 1 full year. Like, if I had to be a rucking monster for selection in a year, here's what I'd do. So I would definitely listen to that episode, because it's still going to apply to you. The same things are going to apply to you, but without knowing more about your foot issue, I really can't give you anything specific as far as what would be different for you versus somebody else. So that's really all I got for you. Hopefully you can get it figured out, and hopefully you can manage it. And I will say, don't lose hope. Even if you do have some structural issues, whether it's foot issues or something else, there may be a way where you can still become a rucking monster, or really just a general fitness monster. It of course does depend, but good on you for trying to work through it and chase your dreams, whatever they may be, and best of luck to you. Next question is not a question, just an update. Jack Gazelle increased my bench from 255 to 295 in 3 months. So he's only 3/4 of the way through the program. 1 month to go. That's what's up. Results vary, but you can expect to get stronger on that program. 255 to 295 is no joke either. Like, not that, 255 is not some astronomical bench, but to put 40 pounds on your bench in 3 months, when you're also doing a bunch of other training too, and I'm assuming you probably got fitter for your conditioning and things like that as well, and your squat and your deadlift as well. 40 pounds is really no joke. So good on you. Thanks for the update. And yeah, if you guys have success stories like this, I love to see them. So feel free to share, or you could just go on the website, write a review, something like that. My programs have severely lacking reviews. So I get a lot of reviews via messages. A lot of people will put their reviews up on Reddit, especially the 2 and 5 mile, but they are definitely severely lacking actual reviews. So if you followed my program and got good results from it, or if you got shitty results, I don't care. Put a review up there. And I like to see some of those reviews. It just helps more people find the programs. It gives some social proof and helps more people be like, oh, okay, that program worked for him. It's probably going to work for me. And I kind of feel a little bit greedy asking for the reviews, but my program sales to review ratio is astronomically high. Like I've sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of every program, and I've got maybe a total of like 35 reviews across all 7 products. So I would greatly appreciate that. If you could take 2 minutes, it does not have to be elaborate. Go on there. Let me know what you think. It is on the website under the programs, and that would be very, very nice of you, and I'd appreciate that. Next question. Ooh, this is a good one. What kind of person shouldn't try to become a Green Beret? I like it. Inversion thinking. This is one of my favorite ways to solve problems, is to list all the things not to do so you can do the opposite and crush. So we will go through a few that just come to mind off the top of my head. I did not prepare for this question, so it'll be a little bit more of a spitball riff. But people who are easily offended, or people who like to play victim. Like if you find yourself going online or even in person, most people like this do it online because they're behind their computer, their keyboard, or their phone. And it's a lot less barrier to entry. But if you go and find yourself offended a lot by a lot of things, and it actually bothers you, like it legit bothers you, or like ruins your day, or even ruins or even you take a second thought about it, then you're not going to do well at all as a Green Beret. If you have thin skin, you can't take criticism, or when someone criticizes you, you take it personally and think of it as like a hit to you as an individual rather than like constructive feedback for getting better in the future, you're not going to do very well. If you have a more lackadaisical attitude and you're not type A, there are definitely non-type A personality Green Berets, but they're very, very rare. They are the exception, not the rule. So most Green Berets are major, major go-getters. They are not cool with being average or mediocre really at anything, but especially things that are like performance oriented. So that's a huge one as well. You want to be some sort of go-getter, hard charger. Like usually people who are not very anxious, they don't really think about the future. Believe me, I'm not saying like you should try and become more anxious, but generally speaking, if you're like always kind of just whatever, go with the flow, and you don't really have like ambitions, you don't think about the future very often, you don't have big goals that you go chase, usually people like that are not even going to be interested in being Green Berets. But even if you kind of hear about them and you like the idea of being a Green Beret and you're kind of that type of person, you're not going to fare very well. Other people who won't do very well are people who quit when things get tough, or they just can't stick to anything, or they are fine when conditions are good. They perform really well when conditions are good, but they absolutely lose their mind and everything goes to shit when conditions aren't good, because newsflash, conditions are not going to be very good during the entire pipeline, nor will they be good once you get done with the pipeline. Your job as a Green Beret is to make do with a soup sandwich of conditions in general. Of course, there's exceptions to that, but usually your conditions for optimal performance and optimal clarity and optimal getting after it are just going to be shit. You're going to be sleep deprived, food deprived, stressed out, traveling a lot, and it's just not perfect to like optimize your life in any way or your performance. And you're still going to be expected to perform just as high as you would otherwise, even if conditions were perfect, but they won't be. So somebody who's just not very consistent, like you have really, really good days when things are going well, but you have terrible days when things are not going well. You should be able to have consistent, solid days regardless of what's going on, and be able to compartmentalize very, very well. Not saying like you should ignore stress and override it or anything like that, but if things are going on, like say you have a shitstorm going on at your house or with your relationship or something like that, that should not carry into the team room. That should not carry into work. That is completely separate, and being able to separate those things or compartmentalize those things is huge. And if you really just let everything bother you and it bleeds into other aspects of your life, like people can tell when you're having a bad day or a good day, you're not going to fare very well. Of course, if you're not fit, like very, very fit, you're not going to do very well. You don't have to be a superstar. There's no requirement to be an elite athlete or anything like that, but you definitely have to be more fit than the average person. You have to be very consistent with your training as well as the things that you do outside of training that will enhance your recovery and your performance, like sleeping, eating, and not being a ball of stress all the time. That's important too. I will say plenty of guys, including myself, definitely did not have the best outside of training habits, and we still made it. But that's almost kind of an example. I'm not saying this is the right way to do it, but that's kind of an example. Is like, I just self-induced all these terrible conditions for me to perform. And guess what? That doesn't matter. I'm going to still go perform because that is just what has to happen. So probably a lot more things that I didn't get to, but I would say those are probably the bigger ones. If you can relate to any of those things, of course you can fix yourself. If you want to be a Green Beret, you can definitely change. Anyone can change, but you got to really want it. You got to really put the work in to change, or else you're just not going to have a very good time, and your time is going to be short-lived. You might not even make it past first couple days of selection. Next question, after finishing the base phase, how long can I run the 2 and 5 mile program over and over? Or is that not a good idea? It's usually not a good idea. You could definitely run it twice in a row. I don't think there's any issue running it twice in a row. What I would do if you do that though, once you finish the second time trial week, like the very end time trial week, I would take probably 2 weeks where maybe you can refer to like the base phase and just do like some easy base running, mostly easy runs, a little bit of strides, a little bit of pickups, but no speed work for a couple weeks, no super long runs for a couple weeks to kind of let your body and your mindset recover and refresh so that you can start that program up again. That program is not crazy high volume. It's nothing too excessive, but it's definitely intense. And if you just follow it immediately, like you start week 1 right away, you're probably going to need a deload pretty quickly. Whether you take that, that's kind of on you, but I would much prefer you take a couple weeks where you just kind of dial things back. For lifting, you can follow either of the phases, or if you have some other lifting split, you can do that while you're off. But definitely want to take it easy, and then you can hop back into it. Beyond that, though, I probably would not follow it like 3 times in a row. I would take a different program after you follow it the second time, maybe Jack Gazelle or Jack Gazelle 2.0, or even T850, the training team. That will give you a little bit more lifting. It's a little more hybrid than what the 2 and 5 mile is. Although 2 and 5 mile, I'm starting to call it a hybrid program because guys are getting strong on it. But it's not as strength oriented as Jack Gazelle 1 or 2. So that's kind of what I would consider. You'll make better progress if you take breaks from certain things. And this really honestly goes for pretty much every program. Your body gets used to these stimuli. And even though you're going to be way fitter the second time you go through, so like your runs are going to be faster, your paces are going to be faster, you're still more prone to hitting diminishing returns, especially because all the lifts are going to be the same and all the run sessions are going to be the same, and a little bit more variety would be beneficial, but nothing wrong with hitting it twice and going from there. Next question, how to properly train for plank. Live in a plank. And I'm not joking. You can live in a plank. I've talked about this a little recently, so I will be very brief, but the plank does not cause almost any muscle damage. It does not cause any lingering fatigue that you have to really recover from. So you can pretty much be in a plank several times a day, almost every single day, and be good to go. I think the plank is the exercise in the ACFT or the AFD, whatever they're calling it these days, that is the least okay to fail because it is so easy to train. You just basically just spend more time in a plank. And every time you do it, try and add a little bit of time, or every week you do it, add a little bit of time, or add another plank session throughout your week. And before you know it, you're going to be getting there. Most of it is mental. Once you have spent enough time in a plank, a lot of people who fail planks, it's mostly mental. They just break down because it's boring and it's monotonous and it's painful. But I have not done a plank since the last time I took an ACFT, which is probably 2013 sometime. And I am 98% sure I would be able to max the plank. It would be rough because I don't train it at all. I don't think training a regular plank is something you should really include in your training, unless, of course, you're prepping for the plank for the ACFT. But I am pretty sure I could just kind of hang on for dear life and finish it. So that's my recommendation on planks. Live in a plank. No excuse not to. You don't even have to get crazy into the weeds with programming. You just do planks more often and you will get there. Next question, workout plan for a little under 1 year till I want to take an 18 X-ray contract. I would probably go and listen to, I don't remember what episode this is. By the way, I'm not going to give an entire 1 year plan. I don't think he's asking for that. I think he's asking for a program, but I would listen to, I don't remember the number, but I believe it's called What I Would Do If I Were 1 year out from selection. So you're a little different because you're 1 year out from OSET. So it's a little different, but that'll give you a decent idea of some things to start considering. And then as far as programming, it really just depends. I would go back and listen to the last episode, 170, and see which programs sound the best to you. Jack Gazelle 2, 2 and 5 mile, really anything would be sufficient. It just kind of depends on where you're at. Next question. Since coming into contact with TFVooDoo, how have you tweaked your programming, if at all? I occasionally use the 5x5 with some of my clients, and I'll occasionally put it in TA50 as well at the end of a training block. If people want to do it, they can. But aside from that, none at all. TFVooDoo is a great dude. I have nothing but respect for him, but him and I do not program the same way. And most of the people who he kind of recruited to help him program in, I think it's Shut Up and Ruck is the one with the programming in it. I don't program the same way as them. Not saying that it's wrong. People get great results on his programming, but I personally have different people that I've learned how to program from and resources and experiences that I've learned how to program from. So you won't see anything all that similar between our programs other than like the fact that you're running and rucking and lifting, but they don't have the same structure. They don't look really all that much alike. And yeah, lots of different paths to Rome. His path works. My path works. I don't really change much unless I see something is necessary. And I really like using his 5x5 as a benchmark session to see where you're at. I don't like using it as a regular training thing. Not saying it's wrong. I just don't think it is. I think it's more of a test than a training session. And that's what I've experienced by using it with my clients, as well as just thinking about the physiology and the potential recovery costs of things and the way that progress is made and recovery and all that stuff. But to answer your question, I haven't changed really anything other than implementing that. Next question, has your 18 Delta knowledge been helpful in creating your coaching and training plans? No, honestly not. I mean, certain nuanced things that come up, like with clients, sometimes I fall back on certain 18 Delta stuff, but for doing that virtually, it's kind of like, oh, this might be going on. Go talk to this person. Or this could be your issue. Maybe you're dealing with this like medical thing, but I'm virtual and I am not a doctor. So go talk to this type of doctor or go get these types of labs done or something like that. All right. I am back for the third time, I believe, after a power outage. So I am going to answer 2 more questions and wrap this up. Apologies for the shakiness and any background noise that you guys can hear, but I am determined to finish this. All right. So let's go to the next question. What is the book you've recommended most to others? How to Win Friends and Influence People is right up there. Atomic Habits is probably another one by James Clear. That's a really great read. Let's see, what else is a really good one for like more business or for more like general self-development, success, things like that. Probably The One Thing. I don't remember the authors of The One Thing, but those are some really, really good ones. Thinking Fast and Slow is a great one. If you struggle making decisions is being able to make the right decisions, whether it's a big decision or a small decision, is super important, especially if you want to go pursue a career in SOF. And a lot of people really struggle with it. They take the same amount of time to make a super easy, very low stakes decision as they would for a super high stakes decision, like who they're going to marry or what they're going to do for a job or things like that, things that should be taken a little bit more time to make those decisions. But those are probably some of the top ones. I know you only asked for one, but that's where I would begin. All right, we will do one more question. What do you think about fasting? So it really depends on what your goals are and what your experience is with past eating, potential issues or anything like that. So types of people that should probably not fast: anyone who has a history of an eating disorder that involves either anorexia or bulimia or anything close to that. Those are the type of people that should not fast, because basically what you're doing is enabling them to just have their eating disorder again. It's almost like a former alcoholic recovering, and you give them a way to go about drinking that won't make them into an alcoholic again, if that makes sense. So those are the type of people who should not even consider fasting. The type of people who should consider fasting are people who have this like extreme attachment to eating at a certain cadence, and they lose their mind if they miss a meal, or they get hangry if they haven't eaten for 2 or 3 hours. Those are the type of people who should learn how to actually feel hungry. Most people who think they're hungry, they're not actually hungry. Learning what it feels like to actually be hungry is a valuable thing, especially if you're going to go pursue SOF or something like that, because you're going to be hungry quite often during the Q course. But it's also a really good idea just to know that and be assured that your body is not just going to shut down, your muscles not going to fall off your body if you go 12, 14, 16 hours without eating. This is assuming you're eating enough when you are actually eating. Of course, you could lose muscle if you just don't eat much overall, but fasting is a good way to kind of get comfortable with that. For example, I personally, since I stopped my ultra prep, I have been fasting most days. I usually don't eat anything till 11 to 1 o'clock, depending on the day. And then I stop eating at like 7 or 8 at nighttime. So that's a good solid 15, 16, 17 hour fast almost every single day. And I don't do it for really any specific reason other than the fact that I feel more mentally sharp when I'm fasting, which honestly, if you are someone who's like really, really high stress and high strung, or you have like high cortisol or something like that, you've been told that, or your labs show that, or you just know you have a lot going on and you are just struggling to hang on, you might feel better when you fast, but also you're feeling better because it is a stressor. So it increases your cortisol. So that would be the type of person that I wouldn't really recommend fasting. The best way to use fasting though is detachment from food, as well as allowing yourself to have almost a tool in your toolbox other than, if you're trying to get lean, you could create a calorie deficit in many different ways. And fasting is one of them, just by reducing how much time you have to eat. Believe me, you can definitely fast every single day and still gain weight. Calories in, calories out is still a thing, but it is more difficult to eat in a calorie surplus, for example, if you only have 4, 6, 8 hours to eat or something like that. Longer fasts, like 2-day fast, 3-day fast, I wouldn't start with that, but maybe start with like a 1-day fast and then work your way up. That can be beneficial for like spiritual reasons, as well as kind of just giving your digestive system a break. I really like to use like full 24-hour fasts for people who have been bulking for a long time. Believe it or not, sounds counterintuitive, but when you are just always eating in a surplus and you're always eating constantly every couple hours, every single day, and you've been doing it for a long time, you're going to be really freaking sick of eating. So most of the time when I tell people who have been bulking to fast, they like thank me because they're excited to not eat for a day. But what that does is just allow your digestive system to take a break, and you are just more receptive to nutrients when you start eating again. So although, yes, you're missing out on full 24 hours of eating a surplus, if you have been in a bulk for whatever, a couple months, and you don't eat for one day, 24 hours, so you don't eat from like 6 p.m. one day till 6 p.m. the next day, you're still going to get food in that day, maybe not quite as much, but having one day where you're in a slight deficit is not a huge deal. So that'd be a good reason to use it. If you're trying to gain muscle, like your goal is to maximally gain muscle and or strength, fasting would not be the best option, wouldn't be optimal. You definitely can still build muscle when you're fasting. I've built muscle since I stopped training for my ultra. A lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm not running a ton and I'm also lifting a lot more. But also I've been fasting pretty much every day. I don't like intentionally do it. I just kind of have this habit of not eating breakfast and just not eating till lunch, and then I eat lunch, a snack, and then dinner in the evening. And there's a slight difference between daily time restricted eating, you could call that fasting if you want, versus longer prolonged fasts. But it's kind of semantics. There's definitely different benefits to each one, but I just kind of call it what I do fasting. But if your goal is to like maximize muscle gain, especially if you're a hard gainer, you struggle to eat enough in general, cutting down your eating window is not a very good idea. Additionally, if you eat like a child and you treat your body like an amusement park in regards to nutrition, then fasting's not a very good idea because you're probably not getting enough nutrients in anyway, especially if you're not getting enough protein in. If you can't go 3, 4, 5 meals a day, eating at normal times, like starting in the morning, finishing at nighttime with your daily eating, and get enough protein in, or even get enough micro or macronutrients in general, guess what? When you cut half that off, you don't start eating till the afternoon, you're going to get even less in. So that's not a very good idea either. So fasting used to be, a lot of people used to think it was like some magic panacea of like everything good, nothing bad. And there are definitely pros and cons to it. I might make an episode on fasting in the future. If anyone wants to learn more about it, drop it in the comments. But I'm not sure if it's a hugely relevant thing. I think it can absolutely be beneficial for certain people in certain situations that I kind of just went over. But it's definitely not a panacea, and it's not just a get out of jail free card to eat whatever the hell you want. And there's definitely certain people that should steer clear of it. But if you have never really gone more than a sleep without eating food, then you might be a very good candidate for trying some fasting out, just to actually know what it feels like to be truly physically hungry, not psychologically have cravings, but be physically hungry. There is a difference between having a craving that is psychological and being hungry that is physiological. And when you fast, you don't eat for a while, you actually get to learn what being physiologically hungry feels like. And that can be very beneficial for certain people who have never experienced it, especially, like I said, if you're going to a course, or you're going to the Q course, or you're going to Ranger School, you're going to be hungry then. And practicing being hungry, of course, ensuring that you're eating plenty when you are actually eating, and not just going hungry and starving yourself. That's just anorexia. But that can be a good, valuable thing to do, because it helps you learn that it's not the end of the world. If you're a little hungry, you're going to be okay. You don't have to get crazy, all pissed off and hangry, and everyone's going to be fine, and including you. So that's kind of my spiel on fasting. Kind of jumped around a little bit there, but hopefully that gives you kind of a good idea of it. Nothing magic, but can be beneficial for certain people. And that's it, guys. Hopefully not too much of this episode got cut out and you guys were able to get something good out of it. I will be back soon with another episode. Until then, Terminator out.